My stepmother poured bleach over every piece of clothing I owned because I told her daughter she couldn't have my truck. The fumes burned my throat, but her words hit harder. "You're nothing without this family," she hissed. "Sign the shop over to your sister, or I'll make sure you leave with even less than nothing." I didn't scream. I didn't swing. I picked up my father's old fishing tackle box, the one with his initials carved into the lid, and a brass plate inside that read, "The river always remembers," and I walked out the front door in a bleach-stained shirt, with chemical burns starting to blister across my forearms. When they came back from brunch the next Sunday expecting everything to be normal, the locks had been changed, the business accounts were frozen, and a woman in a gray blazer was sitting on the porch with a stack of documents that would turn their whole world inside out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you everything, I want to ask, can you drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from? It means more than you know. Knowing that someone out there hears me makes it easier to say the parts that still hurt. And if this story speaks to you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Every voice in the comments, every subscription, helps me keep telling these stories that people tried to bury. My name is Caleb Mercer, and this is what happened to me. My father built Mercer Hardware on the corner of Broad and Vine in downtown Savannah when I was 6 years old. I remember the smell of sawdust and WD-40 and the way sunlight hit the concrete floor in long amber stripes every afternoon. He taught me to cut keys before I could ride a bike. By the time I was 14, I could restock a wall of fasteners blindfolded and talk a first-time homeowner through a plumbing repair without looking at a manual. The shop wasn't fancy. It didn't have to be. It had my father's handshake and 40 years of neighbors trusting his word. When Dad married Lorraine, I was 19 and already managing the weekend shifts on my own. She came with a daughter, Peyton, 2 years younger than me, pretty in the way that opens doors without knocking. Lorraine smiled wide for the wedding photos and cried at the reception and told my father she would love his son like her own. I believed her. I wanted to. For the first 2 years, it almost worked. Lorraine redecorated the house, joined the Savannah Garden Club, posted pictures of our family dinners on Facebook like we were something out of a catalog. Peyton got a part-time job at a boutique on Broughton Street, and Lorraine started telling people her daughter was learning the family business, even though Peyton had never once set foot behind the counter at Mercer Hardware. Then my father had his first heart attack. It was a Tuesday in March, the azaleas just starting to bloom. I found him on the shop floor next to a toppled display of PVC fittings, his face gray and his breathing shallow. I rode with him in the ambulance. I slept in the hospital chair for 9 nights. Lorraine visited twice, once to bring him a robe, once to ask where he kept the checkbook. Dad survived, but the recovery was slow. He couldn't lift anything over 10 pounds. He couldn't stand for more than 20 minutes, so I took over. Not officially. There was no ceremony, no paperwork. I just did it. I opened at 6, closed at 8, handled payroll, negotiated with vendors, rebuilt the website myself on weekends. I coded an inventory management system that tracked stock levels in real time and cut our waste by 30%. I didn't ask for credit. I didn't need it. The shop was my father's dream, and keeping it alive was the only thing that mattered. What I didn't know was that Lorraine had been busy too. 3 years after the heart attack, my father passed in his sleep, quiet, the way he did everything. I was the one who found him in the morning. I sat with him for a long time before I called anyone. The tackle box was on the nightstand. He must have been holding it the night before. I took it home and set it on my dresser and didn't open it for weeks because I wasn't ready to feel whatever was inside. The funeral was standing room only. Half of Savannah showed up. The hardware shop closed for 3 days, and when I reopened, customers left flowers by the register. A woman I'd never met told me her husband had learned to build their back deck from my father's patient instructions. That was who he was. Not a businessman, a neighbor who happened to sell nails. 2 weeks after the burial, Lorraine called a family meeting at the kitchen table. Her eyes were dry, and her voice was corporate. She told me she had power of attorney, and that Dad had signed a new operating agreement before he died, naming her as the primary owner of Mercer Hardware and listing Peyton as assistant manager. My role, according to this document, was consultant non-voting. I asked to see the paperwork. She slid it across the table. My father's signature sat at the bottom, but the letters were too even, too controlled. My father's handwriting after the heart attack had a visible tremor. The doctors called it an essential tremor, common after cardiac events. This signature was smooth as a printed font. I said I didn't believe it was real. Lorraine's face went hard. Your father wanted this, she said. He told me himself. He knew you weren't ready. Peyton, sitting beside her mother with a latte in one hand and her phone in the other, smiled at me like I was a child who'd asked for dessert before dinner. Maybe you could help out on weekends, she offered. Like you used to. Like I used to. As if the last 4 years of my life had been a hobby. I went home that night and opened the tackle box. Beneath the lures and the tangled line, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter in my father's shaky post-heart attack handwriting, dated 3 months before he died. Caleb, I set things up with Margaret Chen so you'd be protected. She has my real wishes. Don't let anyone tell you what I wanted. I wrote it down myself. The river always remembers, and so will you. Margaret Chen was my father's attorney. I called her office the next morning. I also called the police. The officer who came to the house documented the bleach damage to my clothes and the chemical burns on my forearms. He took photographs. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. He filed an assault report and gave me a case number. I went to Savannah Memorial's urgent care and had a nurse clean and bandage the burns. She noted the pattern consistent with a chemical splash, not an accident. I asked for copies of everything. That was the first thing I did differently than the person I used to be. The old Caleb would have let it go, told himself family doesn't call the cops on family, but family doesn't pour bleach on you either. I was done pretending that loyalty required me to bleed. Margaret Chen's office was on the second floor of a restored cotton warehouse near River Street. The stairs creaked and the hallway smelled like old wood and fresh coffee. She was waiting for me with a brown accordion folder thick enough to stop a door. Your father came to me 8 months before he passed, she said. He was worried. He told me Lorraine had been pressuring him to change the ownership structure. He refused. Instead, he created a trust. She opened the folder. Inside was the real operating agreement, the one my father actually signed, tremor and all. It named me as sole owner of Mercer Hardware upon his death, with a provision that Lorraine could remain in the family home for up to 5 years, as long as she didn't interfere with the business. There was also a codicil, handwritten and witnessed by 2 of his oldest friends. If any forged documents surfaced claiming to alter ownership, the trust would activate immediately, granting Margaret full authority to act on my behalf without delay. My chest tightened. He knew. He saw it coming, and he built a wall around me before he left. Margaret pulled out a second document, a certified letter my father had sent to the house, addressed to me the month before he died. Tracking records showed it was delivered and signed for by Lorraine. I never saw it. She intercepted it. That's mail fraud, Margaret said, voice steady as a courthouse pillar. Federal offense. I sat in that chair and let the weight of it settle. My father, weakened and trembling, had spent his final months protecting me from the people sleeping under his own roof. Not with anger. Not with confrontation. With paperwork, forethought, and the quiet certainty that truth outlasts manipulation if you write it down. I gave Margaret the operating agreement Lorraine had shown me, the one with the forged signature. She compared it to samples from the trust file. Even without a handwriting expert, the difference was obvious. My father's real signature, after the heart attack, looked like a seismograph reading. The fake one looked like a font called Dad. She also flagged the notary. The seal on the forged document belonged to a man named Dennis Pratt, who ran a small tax prep office off Abercorn Street. Margaret checked the state notary database. Pratt's commission had actually expired 6 weeks before the date on the document. He was notarizing with a dead seal. That alone is a criminal offense in Georgia, she said. We'll report it to the Secretary of State's office. I spent the next 2 weeks building a case the way my father taught me to build a shelf square, level, and strong enough to hold weight. I pulled the security camera footage from the hardware shop. Lorraine had visited the store exactly once during the 4 years I ran it, to take photos for a Facebook post where she called herself a proud small business family. Peyton had never clocked a single hour. I exported the bookkeeping records from the inventory system I built. Every vendor payment, every tax filing, every quarterly report, all prepared by me, all under my login credentials. The digital trail was unbroken. Riley, my former coworker, and the only employee who'd stayed through all 4 years, signed an affidavit confirming that I had managed the store full-time since my father's heart attack, and that neither Lorraine nor Peyton had ever been involved in operations. Then Yara, a friend who worked in IT, helped me recover deleted emails from the shop's old server. Lorraine had wiped her account, but the backups were still sitting on a hard drive in the closet. We found a thread from 14 months before my father died, Lorraine, emailing Peyton a plan. The subject line was, transition timeline. The emails laid it out step by step. Get Dad to sign new papers, move Caleb to a background role, rebrand the store's social media to feature Peyton, and slowly phase me out until no one remembered I was ever there. The send date was the morning of my father's second cardiac episode. While I was in the waiting room bargaining with God, they were drafting my erasure. I saved everything to an encrypted drive, printed hard copies, and stored the originals in a fireproof box I kept at Riley's house. Then, I called Margaret and told her I was ready. She filed a motion to activate the trust protective provisions. She submitted the forged document to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Document Examination Unit. She reported Dennis Pratt to the Secretary of State. She sent a cease and desist to Lorraine, demanding she stop representing herself as owner of Mercer Hardware, and she scheduled a mediation. The night before the mediation, I drove out to Tybee Island and sat on the sand with the tackle box in my lap. The waves did what waves do, they kept coming, regardless of what was happening on shore. I opened the box and read my father's letter one more time. The river always remembers. I folded it carefully, put it back, and watched the lighthouse beams sweep across the dark water like a slow, patient eye. I wasn't nervous. I was awake. The mediation took place in a conference room on Bay Street with a view of the river. Margaret sat to my left. Lorraine and Peyton sat across from us, with an attorney they'd hired 3 days earlier, a man who kept checking his phone like he wished he were somewhere else. Margaret began without ceremony. She placed the trust document on the table, followed by the codicil, followed by the intercepted letter with its tracking receipt. She laid out the forged operating agreement beside my father's real signature samples and let the tremor speak for itself. She showed the expired notary commission. She played the deleted email thread on a laptop screen, Lorraine's own words scrolling past in black and white. Lorraine's attorney leaned over and whispered something. She shook her head sharply. "This is a family matter," Lorraine said, her voice controlled but thin. "Caleb has always been jealous of Peyton. He can't accept that his father moved on." Margaret didn't flinch. "The Georgia Bureau of Investigation has accepted the forged document for analysis," she said. "The Secretary of State has opened a case against the notary. The assault report is on file with Savannah Police, and the federal mail fraud referral is pending." She paused, not for drama, but to let the weight land. "Mrs. Mercer, your options are narrowing." Peyton started to speak, but her mother's hand shot out and gripped her wrist. The room went quiet except for the air conditioning and the faint sound of a boat horn on the river. The mediator reviewed the documents for nearly an hour. He asked Lorraine's attorney if they wished to contest the trust. The attorney looked at his client, then at the pile of evidence, and said he'd need time to review. Margaret responded that the trust provisions were already in effect, and that any further delay would be treated as obstruction. At 3:47 inches the afternoon, Lorraine signed the acknowledgement. The operating agreement she had forged was withdrawn. Mercer Hardware was mine legally, formally, and finally. Peyton didn't sign anything. She didn't have to. She'd never had a claim to begin with. She stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked out without a word. Lorraine followed, slower, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a clock winding down. Margaret gathered the files and looked at me. "Your father would be proud," she said. I nodded, but I couldn't speak yet. The tackle box sat on the chair beside me, and I pressed my hand against the brass plate until the engraved words left a mark on my palm. The following Sunday, Lorraine and Peyton pulled into the driveway of the house on East Gaston Street, expecting to walk in like they always did. The locks had been changed. Under the terms of the trust which Lorraine had violated by committing fraud, her right to remain in the property was void. A property manager I'd hired was waiting on the porch with a formal notice and a 30-day vacate order, signed by a judge that morning. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I was at the hardware store, restocking the key-cutting display, the one my father built with his own hands when I was 6. A regular customer came in and asked for a duplicate house key. I cut it for him, tested it twice, and handed it over. "New locks?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. The weeks after that were strange and quiet, not peaceful exactly, more like the hush after a storm passes and you walk outside to check what's still standing. I moved into a small apartment near Forsyth Park, 2 rooms, hardwood floors, a kitchen window that looked out onto a magnolia tree, so old its branches touched the glass. It wasn't grand. It was mine. I hung my father's original store sign, the hand-painted one from 1998, on the wall above the couch. On the bookshelf, I placed the tackle box, open, so I could see the brass plate every morning. Next to it, I put the bleach-stained shirt, folded neatly in a clear frame. Not as bitterness, as proof. Proof of what I survived. Proof that I didn't let someone else's cruelty define me. Business came back to normal faster than I expected. Customers who'd been confused by Lorraine's Facebook posts started showing up again once the truth got around. And in Savannah, truth travels through neighborhoods like rain, through Spanish moss, slow but thorough. A retired contractor named Earl, who'd known my father since the store opened, shook my hand one morning and said, "Glad you're still here, son. Your daddy built this place honest, and it shows." That cracked something open in me I'd been holding shut for a long time. 3 months later, the Savannah Public Library invited me to speak at a community event about small business resilience. I almost said no. Public speaking wasn't my thing. I was the guy behind the counter, not behind a podium. But Margaret convinced me. "People need to hear it," she said. "Not for you, for them." The room was warm and full. Folding chairs packed tight, the smell of old books and lemon polish in the air. I stood at the front and told the truth. Not all of it, some details belonged to courtrooms and therapists, but enough. I told them about the bleach, about the forged papers, about my father's letter and the tackle box and the trust he built to protect me when he knew he wouldn't be around to do it himself. "Freedom isn't revenge," I said at the end. "It's refusing to let someone else write your story. It's knowing that you can walk out a door and still be whole on the other side." A woman in the second row was crying. A man near the back stood up and said his own brother had tried to steal his mother's house while she was in hospice. "I thought I was the only one," he said. He wasn't. That's the thing about these stories. They're never just yours. After the event, I walked down Bull Street toward the river. The air was heavy with jasmine and the distant thump of a live band on the waterfront. I passed a couple arguing softly on a bench, a kid chasing pigeons, a man selling pralines from a cart. Ordinary life, moving forward, whether you're ready or not. I ran into Lorraine once, at the Kroger on Duren. She was in the cereal aisle. I was reaching for coffee filters. We saw each other at the same moment. I expected venom. What I got was something worse: exhaustion. She looked smaller, like someone had let the air out of her performance. I gave her a nod. Not forgiveness, not an invitation, just acknowledgement that we'd both survived something, even if we'd been on different sides of it. She looked away and pushed her cart toward the checkout. I stood there for a moment, holding my coffee filters, and realized I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not loss, just the quiet hum of a life that finally belonged to me. I started writing things down after that. Not for an audience, just for clarity. The first sentence came easy. My stepmother poured bleach over every piece of clothing I owned. The rest followed like water, finding its way downhill. I posted a short excerpt online, and within a day, strangers were sending me messages from places I'd never been to, telling me their own versions of the same wound. A woman in Manchester whose sister forged her mother's will. A man in the Philippines whose uncle sold the family land while he was overseas. A teenager in Ohio whose stepfather threw away his college acceptance letters. Their pain wasn't identical to mine, but it rhymed, and that rhyme was enough to make all of us feel less alone. Do I still feel loss? Every day. Not for Lorraine, not for Peyton, but for the family I thought I was joining when my father remarried. The fantasy of holiday dinners and shared laughter, and someone who would call me son even when the biology didn't match. That version of life was never real, but losing the dream of it still stings in quiet moments late at night when the apartment settles and the magnolia outside taps the window like a finger asking to come in. But I don't measure my worth by what was taken from me anymore. I measure it by what I've built. A business that serves its neighborhood honestly. An apartment where no one screams. A tackle box on a shelf with a brass plate that says the only thing I've ever needed to hear. The river always remembers. And so do I. Maybe you know this feeling. Maybe someone close to you tried to rewrite your life, silence your voice, or convince you that you were the problem when they were the ones holding the eraser. Maybe you're sitting with a wound right now that no one else can see, wondering if it's worth the fight to reclaim what's yours. It is. I promise you, it is. Not because the fight is easy or clean or cinematic, it's not. It's paperwork and sleepless nights, and the sick feeling of realizing that people who were supposed to love you had a plan, and you weren't in it. But on the other side of that fight is a door, and through that door is a life where your name is on the things you built and no one else gets to take credit. You don't have to stay in the house that hurts you. You don't have to hand over what's yours to keep a peace that was never real. You can walk away, and you can build something better from the ground up. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, if it stirred something, or reminded you of your own battle, please tell me. Drop a comment, share where you're from, or just say, I hear you. Because the hardest part of telling a story like this isn't reliving the pain. It's the silence afterward, wondering if anyone cared enough to stay until the end. You stayed. That matters more than you know. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, I'd be grateful if you subscribe to this channel. Every subscription helps me keep shining light into the places people tried to keep dark. Not just for me, for anyone who needs to know they're not alone. I'm Caleb Mercer. This was the day I stopped letting someone else hold the pen. And even though I lost the family I thought I needed, I found something they could never forge, erase, or pour bleach on the truth.